Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. So today I'm going to be talking about the trauma and the blessings that you can find within living with somebody with dementia. At the moment I'm doing the Dementia Challenge, which is walking 100k in March, and I'm not a walker, I have to add, so it is difficult for me, but I'm on day 4 and I'm really enjoying it. Me and Bengie are doing it together. And it's okay, but it is bringing up a lot of emotions for me as well. And I thought I needed to maybe share a little bit about my journey as to why I feel so strongly about this this walk. And now I class myself as being very, very lucky in that I had a great relationship with both my parents, my mum and my dad. But back in 1989, quite unexpectedly, when my mum was at work, she had a brain hemorrhage and was rushed into A&E. I had to leave my kids with my neighbour and rush down to the hospital to be by her side. We sat with her all night. We never thought she was actually going to survive the night. We watched her chain stalk all night. And if you don't know what that is, it means that they take one breath every 4 to 5 minutes. And every breath you think is going to be her last. But she managed to come through the night. We didn't think that she would, but she did. Now, my parents, they lived in each other's pockets from the age of 13. They were very, very close. They never seemed to do anything without each other. You couldn't just go and have a mum and daughter day or a mum and dad day. You had to have a family day, you know, which was lovely. Anyway, the doctors came around the following morning and they decided that it was in her best interest to actually transfer her to another hospital, which we were flabbergasted at, but they did. She actually survived the operation as well, and she went on to live another 20 years after that. But the damage was done, and my mum, as I know, knew her. She was never the same again. She suffered with something called vascular dementia, which is caused by the lack of oxygen getting to the brain. And we spent weeks in the hospital waiting and waiting for her to recover. And she never really recovered fully. She came home and my dad looked after her for many, many years. But eventually she ended up going into a nursing home where she needed 24/7 care. And then many years later, and I'm going to apologise now, in case I get upset over this, I'm going to try not to, because I think I've done all my upsetting today. But many years later, my father got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. It went to the liver, and very, very quickly, within 2 weeks, he was dying. And at that time, I wanted to allow my mum to come and say her goodbyes to him, but he wasn't having any of it. He didn't feel that she would understand, and it would make it harder for him going through the dying process. And we had to respect his wishes. And 1 week later, 3 weeks after he'd been diagnosed, he died. For me, that time with his passing was a very special time. Being spiritual and being a psychic medium, obviously I'm able to see things maybe some other people aren't able to see. And I feel very blessed at that sometimes. And it was one day, probably on his last day, I went to look out the window and I could see my father walking away up the field at the back of his flat. And either side of him was an angel, no wings. I see them as worker angels, and they come to fetch the dying. And he turned and looked back as he was walking away. Sorry. Just give me a minute. Okay, I've composed myself. I'm going to start again. So I saw him walking away, and I'd been very blessed to spend the last 7 days of his life with him. Me and my brother sat vigil by his bedside. And when I turned back from watching his soul walk away, he was still breathing. And that told me that the soul leaves the body before the moment of death. And I just bent down very close to him and said, "Dad, I think it's time to go." So I left the room and I went to go and get some water to moisten his mouth because he was still there. But when I got back, he'd gone. And then we had to have the challenge of going to tell my mum. I'd actually buried this particular memory as it's so painful for me. But I'm going to tell you about it now because it's part of living with dementia. And when we went to tell her that he had passed, she was absolutely devastated. She cried and cried and cried and sobbed, wanting to know why she hadn't been allowed to say goodbye. Why she didn't know about it. What could I say? I couldn't tell her that her beloved husband didn't want her there. She wouldn't understand. She said that if she'd known, she would have given her pancreas or her liver so that he could have lived longer. It was a very, very difficult time. And over those short time when we were telling her about his death, she seemed normal, completely with it. But it didn't last. She did attend the funeral and she enjoyed being the centre of attention. She loved a good party. I have to say she did love a good party. And she never ever, in all the time she had the dementia, she never ever lost her sense of humour. And I count myself lucky there because a lot of people with dementia can get really aggressive and angry, and she didn't. She never got that. The blessing that I found within this tragedy was that she didn't remember that he had died. She did when we were telling her, but then she forgot about it. And I never ever corrected her again after that. Whenever I'd go and see her, she'd always say, "Gaynor, where's your father? I haven't seen him. He hasn't come to see me. What's wrong? I don't know where he is." And I'd always say, "He's gone shopping, Mum. He's probably gone to buy you flowers." Sorry, I'm going to get emotional again. It was always the same. Because living with dementia, they ask the same questions over and over. And answering the same questions over and over can become very wearing indeed. So, if you're still with me, and if you can afford to do it, and of course if you want to, please donate to this challenge. You're not giving me the money, you're giving it to Dementia UK to help fund research and support to families living with this cruel condition. You can find my link in the information below. And I'm going to go and have a good cry now. I'm going to laugh as well. So, if you're still with me, my link is in the information. Please give if you can. Take care.